The widow stood where four roads met nothing, her shadow long and thin as a lie. The bundle in her arms didn't cry anymore, too cold. Or too wise. Ruth Winslow had been walking since dawn. Her boots were splitting at the seams. Her shawl more holes than fabric. The baby Hope, she'd named her. Though Hope felt like a word from another language now, was wrapped in a tattered quilt that had once been cream-colored. Now it was the gray of despair. The November wind bit through everything. Ruth knew she wouldn't survive the night outdoors. She'd known it for miles, but her legs kept moving because stopping meant accepting the end. She heard hoofbeats before she saw the rider. Grant McCoy came from the east, his horse steady beneath him, saddlebags heavy with winter supplies from town. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, his face weathered but not unkind. He'd made his fortune in timber, owned half the mills in Montana Territory, but you wouldn't know it from looking at him. He dressed like any rancher-worn coat. Decent hat. Boots that had seen honest work. He pulled his horse to a stop 10 feet from her. Ruth didn't beg. She'd lost that capacity somewhere between the boarding house that evicted her and this godforsaken crossroads. She simply stated truth. I'm lost. Not the roads. She knew these roads. She'd walked every one of them looking for work, finding only judgment. She meant her life. Her whole existence had become a wilderness with no map. Grant studied her face. He saw the exhaustion, the shame trying to hide beneath dignity, the fierce protectiveness in how she held the bundle. He'd seen that look in his own mirror for 2 years, the face of someone who'd lost their way home. His response was immediate. Then follow me home. No questions about her past. No conditions. No charity wrapped in pity. Just action. Ruth's throat tightened. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. Grant dismounted, began adjusting his stirrups. Can you ride? I can try. That's all any of us do out here. He looked at her directly now, his eyes gray as winter sky. Try or die trying. The land don't care about your past, only what you do today. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her. Hope was tucked between them, finally warm. Ruth felt his heartbeat against her back steady. Unhurried. First human warmth in months. As they rode, snow began to fall, the kind that starts soft and builds to fury. How far? She asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. Far enough, Grant replied, to leave whatever you're running from behind. Ruth closed her eyes. For the first time in 3 weeks, she stopped counting the roads. The storm came like judgment sudden, absolute, blinding. Grant felt Ruth's grip tighten on his coat. Hope made a small sound, not quite a cry. He turned the horse east, toward memory. His ranch was 2 hours ahead in good weather. In this blizzard, it might as well be 2 days. But 20 minutes west stood the old line shack, abandoned trapper's cabin where he and Anna had once sheltered during their courting days. He made the choice fast, safety over pride. The shack appeared through the white like a miracle, low-roofed. Stone chimney barely visible. Grant dismounted, helped Ruth down, and kicked the door open. The interior was rough dirt floor, a pile of old furs in the corner, cobwebs thick as curtains. But the fireplace was intact. Grant worked quickly. He built a fire while Ruth settled in the corner, nursing Hope with her back turned for modesty. The flames caught, pushed back the cold by inches. He boiled snow for water in a tin cup, shared jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. They ate in silence, the kind born of exhaustion rather than discomfort. Ruth noticed the worn Bible tucked in his gear pages marked, edges soft from handling, but he never opened it. You read? She asked. Grant poked the fire. My wife did. I listened. That was enough. Ruth heard the past tense. Didn't press. Out here. You learned quickly some doors opened with questions. Others sealed shut forever. She watched him tend the fire with careful hands. Everything he did was deliberate. Unhurried. A man who'd learned patience the hard way. Why would you help someone you don't know? The question came out softer than she intended. Grant glanced at her, then back at the flames. Maybe because I don't know you. Out here, you can't rope a steer from the porch, you've got to get in the dirt. Ruth almost smiled. Almost. What's your name? Grant asked. Ruth Winslow. Grant McCoy. He added another log. Don't need to know more than that till you're ready. That simple respect asking nothing. Offering space cracked something in her chest she'd thought was sealed forever. Ruth fell asleep with Hope on the pile of furs. Their breathing synchronized. Grant sat watch by the fire, his shadow enormous on the wall. The storm howled outside. But inside, for this one night, there was warmth. He pulled out Anna's Bible, ran his thumb over the cover, but didn't open it. Instead, he whispered to the flames, Anna, if you're listening, tell me I'm not wrong. The fire popped, sent sparks up the chimney. He took that as answer enough. The cabin looked like a prayer someone forgot to finish. Ruth saw it through dawn light neat, solid, lonely. It sat in a clearing surrounded by pines. Smoke rising from the chimney Grant had stoked before they left the line shack. The storm had passed, leaving the world crystalline and brutal cold. They rode in silence. Hope was awake now, wide-eyed, watching snow drip from branches. Grant helped Ruth dismount, pushed the door open. The interior made her chest ache. Everything was clean, functional, but haunted. 2 plates sat on a shelf, one with wear marks, one pristine. A woman's shawl hung on a peg, dust covered like a relic. A rocking chair faced the fireplace, positioned as if waiting for someone who'd never return. Stay till spring, Grant said, breaking the silence. He gestured to a small bedroom off the main room. That was Anna's sewing room. It's yours now. I'll pay wages for housekeeping. No questions asked. Ruth held Hope tighter. Why would you do this? Because this place is swallowing me whole. Grant's voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes betrayed him. And maybe we both need saving. Ruth set Hope down on the bed, turned to face him. You should know what you're offering shelter to. Don't need to know. Yes, you do. Ruth straightened her spine. I was married at 18. My husband died in a mine collapse when I was 19. The town said I distracted him, made him careless. They whispered I brought bad luck. I couldn't find work. Couldn't keep my home. Hope was born on the road 6 months ago. I've been walking ever since. Grant listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said simply, I built an empire in timber. Married my childhood sweetheart, Anna. Spent so much time at the mills that I wasn't there when she went into labor. She died. The baby didn't make it either. His jaw tightened. I saved everyone's livelihood but couldn't save her. They stood in the space between their griefs, recognizing each other. The town will come, Ruth whispered. When they see me here, they'll come. Let them. Grant moved to the fireplace, stoked it. I stopped caring what people think when the only one who mattered stopped breathing. Ruth looked at the 2 plates again. Understood. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering mutual rescue. I'll stay, she said. That night, Grant set both plates on the table for the first time in 2 years. They ate stew in silence, Ruth's cooking, Grant's vegetables from the root cellar. Hope cooed from her basket by the fire. When Grant reached for bread, his hands shook, not from cold, from the weight of hope. Winter gave them routine. Routine gave them language. Language gave them danger. December settled over the cabin like a held breath. Ruth cooked, cleaned, mended clothes by lamplight. Grant chopped wood, repaired tools, checked his trap lines. They moved around each other with growing ease, the dance of 2 people learning to share space without. Collision, Hope thrived. She gained weight, laughed at Grant's shadow puppets on the wall, reached for Ruth's face with fat baby hands. The cabin filled with sounds it had forgotten humming. Footsteps. Life. One evening, Grant sketched something on a piece of bark with charcoal. Ruth leaned over his shoulder. What's that one cradle? He showed her the design curved rockers, high sides, a canopy. Hope's outgrowing that basket. Ruth's throat tightened. A cradle meant permanence. It meant someone believed she'd still be here in spring. I'd like to help build it, she said quietly. Grant looked up, surprised. You want to learn carpentry? I want to learn not to be afraid of tomorrow. So he taught her. They worked in the woodshed, breath visible in the cold. Grant showed her how to hold a plane, how to let the blade ride the grain. He placed his hands over hers to guide the angle, first deliberate touch beyond necessity. Ruth felt the calluses on his palms, the steadiness of his grip. She felt safe. The cradle took shape, slowly curved runners, smooth sides, a headboard carved with simple flowers. They worked in comfortable silence, the rasp of tools their only conversation. Then the preacher came. Reverend Silas appeared one afternoon, riding a gray mare, his face pinched with cold and righteousness. He stopped for water. Grant provided it with cold courtesy. Silas's eyes landed on Ruth, narrowed with recognition. Mrs. Winslow. Didn't expect to find you here. Ruth kept her chin up. Reverend, staying long. Through winter, Grant interjected, his tone flat. She's employed as housekeeper. Silas's expression said he believed that like he believed in summer snow. He drank his water, departed with a meaningful look that made Ruth's stomach turn. After he left, she whispered, He'll talk. Grant was splitting wood, his axe biting deep. Let him. A man who preaches grace but can't show it isn't worth fearing. He swung again. A man's word is his bond, and his silence is his shame. I'll stand by mine. That night, Ruth heard Grant in the main room, reading aloud from the Bible haltingly, slowly. Stumbling over words, she realized he was teaching himself to read. For her. Because she'd once mentioned missing hearing scripture. She pressed her hand to the door, tears sliding silent. Outside, the cradle sat half-finished in the woodshed. Waiting, Hope's fever came with the cold snap, sudden, burning, merciless. Ruth tried everything: cold cloths, willow bark tea, prayers whispered in the dark. But Hope's skin stayed hot as coals, her breathing shallow. Ruth remembered children from her childhood who'd burned like this and never cooled. Grant found her at dawn, pacing with Hope limp in her arms. How long? He asked. Since midnight. He didn't hesitate. I'm going to town for medicine. It's 20 below out there. Ruth's voice cracked. Another storm's coming. Then I'll ride fast. Grant was already pulling on his coat, his gloves. Doctor keeps fever medicine. I'll be back before dark. Grant, you could die. He cupped her face with one gloved hand, made her look at him. And if I don't go, she might. That's not a choice. He rode out into cold that could stop a man's heart. Ruth waited. She walked circles around the cabin, held hope, sang every lullaby she knew. She prayed to a God she wasn't sure listened anymore. She watched the window for a rider who might never return. Hours blurred together. The storm hit at noon, not as bad as feared, but bad enough. Ruth's breath came in gasps. She'd sent him to his death. Just like everyone said, she brought ruin to men who helped her. Then near midnight, hoofbeats. Grant stumbled through the door, his face gray with exhaustion and frostbite. Ice clung to his beard. His hands were swollen, clumsy. But he held out a small bottle. Doctor said 2 drops every 4 hours. Ruth administered it with shaking hands, then turned to Grant. His fingertips were white, his cheeks blotched. She pulled him to the fire, unwrapped his gloves. His hands were frostbitten, not severe, but painful. She rubbed them gently, breathing warm air over his skin, weeping. Why would you risk this? She whispered. For us. Grant's teeth chattered, but his eyes were steady. Because you're not lost anymore, Ruth, and truth is, neither am I. Ruth pressed his hands to her wet cheeks. Your hands will heal. He smiled faintly. Just like the rest of me has been healing, since you walked into that crossroads. Hope's fever broke by morning. Grant's hands were bandaged, he couldn't work for a week. Ruth cared for him now, roles reversed. She fed him soup, read to him from Anna's Bible, sat beside his chair while he slept. One evening, he dozed off mid-sentence. Ruth covered him with Anna's shawl. It smelled like Ruth now, herbs and bread and hope. Not dust. Grant didn't wake, but his breathing steadied. Outside, the cradle sat in the woodshed, still unfinished. But something else was being built, slower and stronger. They came with the thaw of 5 men on horseback, riding like they owned righteousness itself. Ruth saw them first through the window. Her stomach dropped. She recognized the sheriff's badge, the preacher's black coat, the banker's expensive saddle. Grant. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. "They're here." Grant stepped onto the porch as the men dismounted. Sheriff Tom Briggs, Reverend Silas, and Warren Kent, the banker who'd been trying to buy Grant's timberland for 2 years. 2 other townsmen flanked them, faces hard. Warren spoke first, his smile sharp. "Mr. McCoy, we've heard some troubling rumors." "That's so." Grant's voice was flat. "About a woman living here, unwed." Warren's eyes flicked to Ruth in the doorway, holding hope. "We know you're a man of means. But this woman, she has a reputation. The whole territory knows about her husband's death. How she distracted him. How ruin follows her." Reverend Silas stepped forward. "Grant, we're here as friends. Do right by her, marry her proper, or send her away. This scandal affects us all." Grant opened his mouth to speak. Nothing came. Memory crashed over him, townspeople whispering after Anna's death, saying she'd been too delicate for frontier life, that he'd been selfish to bring her west. Their judgment had haunted him. Now, facing them again, his voice died in his throat. Ruth saw it happen, saw him fold. She straightened her spine, walked onto the porch. "I'll leave." "Ruth." Grant's voice was hoarse. "I won't be your burden." She kept her tone even, dignity intact. "I've packed before. I can do it again." Warren smirked. "A wise choice, ma'am." Ruth ignored him, looked only at Grant. His face was torn, paralyzed between fear and something he couldn't name. She'd seen that look before on every face that had turned away from her. "Thank you for the shelter," she said quietly. It was more than most would give. She walked inside, began gathering her few possessions. Hope fussed, sensing tension. Grant stood frozen on the porch. The men watched him with satisfaction. "You'll thank us later, McCoy." Warren said, "A man like you needs to protect his reputation." The sheriff, uncomfortable, added, "We're just trying to keep order." "Grant." Ruth emerged with her bundle, Hope on her hip. She walked past Grant without looking at him, past the men who'd come to save his reputation by destroying hers. She headed toward the tree line. Grant watched her go. His hands, the ones she'd warmed back to life, hung useless at his sides. Inside the cabin, Anna's shawl hung on the peg. If he'd looked, he might have remembered her voice. "Don't let fear make you small." But he didn't look. He just watched Ruth disappear into the pines, taking warmth with her. Warren clapped him on the shoulder. "You did the right thing." Grant said nothing, because he knew he'd done the coward's thing. She walked until her legs forgot how to stop, until Hope's weight felt like the only real thing left in the world. Ruth made it a mile before exhaustion forced her down. She huddled beneath a pine, wrapping Hope inside her coat. The baby was quiet, watching her mother's face with solemn eyes. Ruth wasn't crying. She'd moved past tears into something colder. "We've been lost before," she whispered to Hope. "We'll find another road." But she didn't believe it anymore. Back at the cabin, Grant sat alone. The men had left. The silence was deafening. He stared at the 2 plates on the shelf, one used daily now, one waiting. He looked at Anna's shawl, still holding Ruth's scent. He saw the unfinished cradle through the window, abandoned in the woodshed. Then he opened Anna's Bible. A pressed wildflower fell out, the one she'd picked the day she told him she was pregnant. Glowing with joy he'd been too busy to fully see. He'd found it after her death, placed it here like a bookmark to a life he'd lost. He remembered her last words, whispered through pain. Don't let fear make you small. Be bigger than your grief. He'd failed her then, spent 2 years running from that failure. And tonight, he'd failed Ruth the same way let fear silence him when love demanded he speak. Grant stood abruptly, grabbed his coat. Dawn was breaking when he found her. Ruth was slumped against a tree, unconscious from cold. Hope tucked inside her coat, still breathing. Grant lifted them both, held them close, and rode faster than was safe. At the cabin, he built the fire to roaring, wrapped Ruth in every fur and blanket he owned, made broth. When she woke, disoriented, he was on his knees beside her. Why? Ruth's voice was weak. You let me go. I was wrong. Grant's voice broke. I was a coward. I let them make me small. It's too late. They won't. Ruth Winslow, listen to me. He took her hand, the one that had warmed his frozen fingers. I was lost too. You led me home. Now let me do the same. Ruth stared at him, tears finally coming. What are you saying? I'm saying I choose you. Grant pulled the wildflower from his pocket, showed her. Anna would have loved you. She'd have stood for you. And I should have stood for you too, but I let fear win. He pressed the flower into her palm. I won't make that mistake twice. Grant, marry me. Not because of them. Not in spite of them. Because you're the first thing that's felt like living since Anna died. Because Hope deserves a father who shows up. Because I'm done being a ghost in my own life. Ruth looked at the wildflower, at his face, at Hope sleeping peacefully now in the warm cabin. She didn't answer with words. She just reached for his bandaged hand, the one he'd frozen saving her daughter, and held it. Grant pulled her close, careful of her exhaustion. The wolf that chases 2 rabbits catches neither, he whispered. But the wolf who chooses one that wolf eats. Ruth almost laughed. Almost. Then I'll try, she said, echoing his words from the crossroads. That's all any of us can do. Outside, false spring died, real winter returned. But inside, something warmer than fire took root. A man can run from judgment only so long before he realizes he's been judging himself the hardest. Grant spent the next week teaching Ruth to read the passage from the book of Ruth in Anna's Bible where, You go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. She taught him the words. He practiced until his voice steadied, until he could read without stumbling. Then they rode to town. Ruth was terrified. Hope was bundled between them, warm and healthy. Grant was resolute. If they want to judge, he said, they'll judge us both. It was market day. The town square bustled with wagons and voices. Grant dismounted in front of the general store, the town's heart. Where everyone gathered, a crowd formed quickly. Curious faces, judgmental faces, Warren Kent's smug face. Grant helped Ruth down, kept her hand in his. Warren stepped forward. McCoy, come to your senses. Grant's voice carried across the square. I've come to set the record straight. This woman, Ruth Winslow, is my intended wife. Any man who speaks against her speaks against me. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Warren's smirk widened. You're making a mistake. She's worth 10 of your piety. Kent. Grant's tone was iron. She's stronger than any of you, kinder than most, and braver than I've been. Reverend Silas cleared his throat, but the appearance of impropriety. Grant pulled out Anna's Bible, opened it to the marked page. You want scripture. His voice was steady now, the words hard-won through practice. Ruth said to Naomi, Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Ruth here, he gestured to the woman beside him, said that to me when she stayed through winter. Helped me remember how to live. I'm just finally saying it back. He read haltingly but clearly, showing everyone that he'd changed, been humbled, been taught, Warren's face darkened. You'll be ruined, McCoy. I'll make sure every business in Montana knows you chose a ruin me then, Grant cut him off. I've got land, a strong back, and a family. You've got nothing but gold that'll bury you lonely. Silence fell. Then Martha Doyle stepped forward, an elderly widow. Respected. Sharp-tongued. The boy speaks true. She looked around at the crowd. Which of us hasn't needed grace? Who among us can say we've never faltered? Never needed a second chance? She moved to stand beside Ruth. Others shifted uncomfortably. The sheriff removed his hat, nodded at Grant. A young mother offered Ruth a jar of preserves, eyes apologetic. An old rancher tipped his hat. Your Anna would be proud, son. The rancher said quietly. Warren stood isolated now, his power suddenly hollow. He mounted his horse and rode away without another word. Reverend Silas approached. Humble now. Grant, I spoke in haste. Forgive me. Grant studied him, then nodded once. Judge softer next time. Reverend, you can measure a town by how it treats its weakest. We've been weighed and found wanting. The crowd dispersed slowly, some nodding, some still uncomfortable, but the tide had turned. Grant lifted Ruth back onto his horse. As they rode home, someone started clapping Martha. Others joined. It wasn't celebration. It was acknowledgement. Something broken had been mended. Ruth whispered, You stood for me. Grant's arm tightened around her. I stood for us. Spring came the way all good things come slowly, then all at once, earning every bit of green. April found the cabin transformed. Grant and Ruth had built a new room through March for Hope as she grew. The walls smelled of fresh pine. The cradle sat in the corner, Hope outgrowing it already, pulling herself up on furniture. The cabin felt lived in, now Ruth's herbs drying from rafters, Grant's tools organized by the door, laughter instead of silence. 2 plates on the table, both worn from use. Anna's shawl, now Ruth's, hanging clean and honored. Outside, Ruth planted wildflowers along the front path, the same kind Anna had loved. She worked the soil with careful hands. Grant beside her, digging holes. I'm not replacing her, Ruth said quietly. Grant placed a flower into the earth. I know. You're honoring her. She led me here, to this moment, to you. They planted in comfortable silence, Hope crawling in the grass nearby, chasing a butterfly. Martha Doyle visited weekly now, bringing other women. They taught Ruth canning and quilting. She taught them fearlessness. Grant joined the men at barn raisings again, his reputation not just restored, but deepened. Warren Kent had left town. Rumors said he'd gone bankrupt trying to buy loyalty. The wedding was quiet, held at the cabin on a warm afternoon. Martha, the sheriff, a few neighbors attended. Reverend Silas officiated, humbled and sincere this time. Hope laughed through the vows, reaching for flowers. Grant spoke his vows with steady voice. Ruth, you asked me once why I helped you. Truth is, you helped me. You showed me that home isn't a place, it's choosing someone every day, even when it's hard. Even when fear says run, I choose you. Ruth's voice was clear. Grant McCoy, you gave me a road when I had none. Showed me that being lost isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning. I'll walk with you till there are no more roads left. Martha smiled, eyes wet. Anna's smiling somewhere. I'd bet money on it. Evening found Grant and Ruth on the porch in 2 rocking chairs. He'd built the second one last week. Hope crawled in the grass, determined and fearless. 2 plates were visible through the open door, both used, both cherished. The wildflowers bloomed, Anna's and Ruth's side by side, roots tangled together underground. Grant watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. You know the way home now, Ruth. Ruth's hand found his, their fingers interlacing. She smiled, the real kind, the kind that reached her eyes. I'm already there. They rocked in silence. Hope giggled, victorious over the butterfly she'd finally caught and immediately released. The door stood open, warm light spilling out into dusk. Inside, the unfinished cradle had been completed and outgrown, but something else had been finished in its place, 2 lives rebuilt, log by log. choice by choice, into something strong enough to weather any storm. Every good thing worth having comes the hard way. Every road worth taking starts with a choice to stay, to build, to love when it would be easier to run. Grant and Ruth had chosen, and in choosing, they'd found what they'd both been seeking in that snowy crossroads months ago. Not rescue, home, the end.